I'm honored to be here. And in fact, one of the things I have to do is start a watch because if I don't, you'll be missing dinner. You know, my family jokes with me now because I say, "Oh, I got to talk today," or "I got to talk next week," and my family still say to me, "Oh, what are you talking about?" I was like, "I'm talking about gambling. I'm always talking about gambling." But I'm very honored to be here and to tell you our story and to help you understand where gambling fits in the general landscape of addictions. It wasn't too many years ago that people actually discounted the idea of behavioral addictions, even though it was 1983 when pathological gambling was first appeared in the DSM-3 specifically. I'll talk a little bit about that a little later, but let me give you a run-up to how I got here, who I am, and then what do I want to tell you about gambling. So my experience with this started in 1998. At the time, I was the director of our training clinic, which is a community-facing sort of mental health clinic that's in the psychology building. All the therapists in the doctoral program would do practicums there. And one day, one of these students, Tim Steenberg, comes in my office accompanied by a colleague of mine, a good friend of mine, Andy Myers, and they say, "What do you know about treating gambling problems?" And I was proud at that time that I had built a library of resources for students about addressing a variety of mental health or behavioral health issues. And I thought I had something for everything, but they asked me about gambling, and I said, "I don't know anything. I do not know a thing about how to address gambling." This particular gentleman, that's not him, it's just, I thought a cool picture that I can represent him. But this gentleman came into our clinic and his presenting problem was depression. He was having periods, weeks of being incredibly depressed, then would be okay, and then incredibly depressed. And during the intake evaluation, Tim, who was the therapist, was asking him about various precipitants of the ups and downs. And it seems like up or down, the precipitant was gambling. He was a Shelby County resident who actually, at the time, we didn't have a lottery in Tennessee. He would drive several days a week up to Missouri after work, drive to Missouri, drop a few $100s on lottery tickets, scratch-offs, and drive back to Memphis. And depending on how those scratches worked for him, it was a good or a bad day. It was a good or bad week. So we thought it might be, you know, what's first here? Should we treat the depression? Should we treat the gambling? So we did what good academics should do, and this is a joke, so I'm warming up. This is probably my best joke, so please feel free to laugh. But we did what a good academic researcher should do when you're faced with a problem where you don't know what the answer is. And that is, we sent the graduate student to the library. Thank you very much. I'm here for another 50 minutes. But actually, it is exactly what we did. And Tim and another graduate student came back with a list of readings. So as a group, we read them very quickly, met like 3 days later, and realized this literature is horrible. I mean, there existed some clinical descriptions out there, and there was a program up at the VA in Cleveland, and then there was this French guy up in Quebec. He did a couple of studies. He's a good friend of mine now, but at the time I didn't, interesting studies, but we didn't know what to do. So we actually reached out to colleagues who were addiction researchers. Particularly, a good friend of mine is a huge name in the alcohol treatment literature. Mark and Linda Sobel, I say one person, but they're not. And we started talking to them about what should we do, how should we approach it. And the reason is they're twofold. One is Splash and other casinos had already opened down in Tunica, and Tunica was like building like crazy. And there was, Steve Cohen was trying to get a lottery in Tennessee at the time, and these things were happening. We realized if we don't know what the answer is, there's probably no one who does. And we also thought, oh, this is a research area where we could have an impact. Andy had a history of addiction research, particularly around nicotine. I was dabbling quite a bit in how do you optimize treatment to make it efficient? And we thought, oh, let's do some research about this. And this led us to eventually establishing the Tennessee Institute for Gambling Education and Research. I wish I can, and which the acronym is TIGER, which is cute. It is cute. And I wish I could take credit for thinking that up. I had no part of it. Again, I was a graduate student. And that's actually the story of my entire career, is I have graduate students who are smart, and they say things to me, and I thought, yeah, let's do that. So we called ourselves, we actually initially called ourselves the Institute for Gambling Research, so TIGR. And then one day I showed up at the office and there was a message from someone who said, do you realize you're using a trademarked logo or acronym? And I just hit delete. What do you mean trademarked? A couple weeks later, the guy calls back. This time he identifies himself as an attorney, but it was the same name. I think I'm getting scammed. He's gonna want me to send him $1,000 or something so that he doesn't prosecute me, so I hit delete. The next week I get a phone call from the university attorney saying, have you been getting phone calls from the lead attorney at the Institute for Genomic Research? And I said, maybe. And so we added the E and it made it for better anyway. But we also started the gambling clinic. We didn't call it that initially. It took us a little bit to do this, but we focused on how do we treat this guy? And we actually engaged in a treatment model with him based on what we knew was effective in particularly the alcohol research. But also, we learned so much. He was truly a collaborator in his own treatment, as was the next dozen people. I would give a talk anywhere, corner stores, food trucks, wherever it would be. I would give a talk to say, if you know anyone who has a gambling problem, you can refer them to us. And we started to refine our treatment. And that's when we started this in early 1999, 2000. Today, what we are is we're this group of people plus a few others. We have a summit or a retreat every year. Yeah, Keith's up there. Keith's want to make sure. Keith's one of our peer recovery specialists, and he's in the picture. But we're a team now of about 27 people, I think. My assistant's not in the room, so she can't tell me I'm wrong. I think it's 27 people. One of my former students is an associate professor at East Tennessee State University, Meredith Ginley. And since she started there, we started combining, and it's really a beautiful thing because, they're so focused on rural and Appalachian care, which is very different from treating folks from, the West Tennessee, particularly Shelby County and Memphis. The type of people, the access to health care, so many things are different. And so we partner together and we brought on, my goal is always to bring back my smartest students possible so that I have as little work to do. And that's Rory Fund, who's back here and heads up our research arm. But together, we operate 3 clinics in Tennessee. We hire some students from TSU who work at an office in Nashville. We have a clinic here, we have a clinic in East Tennessee. Everything we do is about how to optimize treatment to people with gambling problems and how to contribute to the generalizable knowledge. We probably published, 70, I stopped counting. I think it's 70 or 80 research studies about how to assess, treat, as well as prevent gambling. And I want to talk a little bit about some of the work that has influenced what we do and to give you guys a broad background on what gambling and gambling problems are about. All of our work is in partnership with people you guys might know, and that's the Department of Mental Health Substance Abuse Services. They've been great partners. They first funded me in 2005, and it's been actually a wonderful journey, but it also included me harassing the hell out of Commissioner Williams when the sports wagering bill was going through. What's that? She did, let me just say, I sent her emails with proposals of what we could do every 3 weeks. And she finally sent me an email. She said, Jim, I know you're there. We'll reach out when we're ready. And I'm like, oh, okay, all right. So I waited 4 weeks before I sent her the next proposal. The mission of our group is to provide a science-informed system of care to reduce the harms caused by gambling for all Tennesseans. And the clinics we work at, we have a fee. It's a laughable fee. We charge $300 for an entire treatment, but we require no one to pay. So I think last year we treated around 260 people. I think we're on track right now to come pretty close to 300 people this fiscal year. Today, in order to give you that broad background, I'm going to talk a little bit about some public health issues, put it in a public health context. I'll talk about some clinical issues, and I'll talk about some prevention stuff. If you guys have questions, let me know. As I said, I can talk all day, and I'm willing, and I won't talk all day, but I'll vary it based on what you want to know. So let's start with public health. And I have to start public health with saying, what is gambling? So gambling, by definition, and I wrote this definition back in 2007, and I'm a little embarrassed by it, but the definition is that it's betting something, money or something of value on a game or event where the outcome at least is partly determined by chance. It seemed when I wrote it, it's in the first chapter of our book, and when I wrote it in 2006, I thought, I nailed it. This is really good. What's that? It was the state of my mind. But it doesn't really capture what gambling is anymore. Gambling is not what FanDuel says it is. And FanDuel says gambling is everything you do. You know, FanDuel had an ad last year that talked about you gamble on whether or not your milk has been spoiled when you put it in your car. No, you don't. You smell the milk first. I don't know what fool just goes. You smell it. Check the date on the side of it. That's not a gamble. But the truth of the matter is gambling has evolved and expanded. The tradition of go to Vegas, go to a casino, buy a lottery ticket, which is sort of normative. Well, at the same time, in 2004 or 5, I went to Nashville to talk to legislators about the lottery, to which I cannot tell you how many legislators saying, we're not legalizing gambling, we're just legalizing a lottery. The lottery doesn't cause any problems, even though the very first guy we had in our program was a guy who only gambled with the lottery. We still have people who come to us who only buy lottery tickets. Most gamblers gamble in a variety of ways, particularly those who have problems. But what has happened over time is gambling is pervasive throughout our world. Sports betting is a big part of it, but I'm also going to tell you there's forms of gambling that most of us in this room don't even think about. Loot boxes in video games, so you buy a chance on a loot box. I am incapable of playing a video game other than Candy Crush, and that's not a video game, I'm told. But there are loot boxes you can bet. There are casinos in some online or internet gaming platforms. There is offshore all sorts of stuff, let alone let's consider whether or not, to what level or to what degree stock trading is gambling. Certainly day trading is. People who sit there and buy and sell every 5 minutes just to see if they can make a buck. Yeah, that's kind of gambling. You know, right now, if anybody's putting any money into investments, I would hold that, because that's not a gamble, that's just a stupid thing to do given the last couple weeks. And what has happened, in 1971, the only place to gamble other than New York and there were a couple states that had lotteries, but you had to take a trip to Vegas or to Atlantic City. Today, gambling is legal in 48 of the 50 states. The states that it's not is Utah. Okay, I get Utah. And Hawaii. Yeah, I get Hawaii. I've been to Hawaii. I don't think I ever thought about gambling in Hawaii, but I'm going to tell you, I just an hour ago saw a news story that a sports betting, mobile sports betting bill has passed both chambers in Hawaii, and it's now headed towards, so Hawaii is going to be off this chart soon as a state where there's legalized gambling. It's a matter of days now. So when we look at this, and by the way, so here, I pulled this is something I pulled down earlier this year, where it said Hawaii is in red. So Hawaii probably never is going to get gambling, but nah, they're going to get sports betting. But when we look at sports betting is legal in most states, 38 plus DC and Puerto Rico, and it's legal online in the vast majority of the states. Tennessee's a little bit unique because we don't have any brick and mortar places to bet. That's legal. Although I'll tell you, if I get another phone call about somebody who's visiting a convenience store where there's a bank of slot machines, it's all over the state, and I know that district attorneys in the state are scratching their head figuring out who has jurisdiction and what they can do about it. But Tennessee's unique. It's only one of 3 states that only has online or remote betting. And you might say, well, why does that matter? And what it matters is it doesn't have an infrastructure for prevention, for setting up policies and procedures. It's a different rodeo when you only have online versus brick and mortar. These changes have also been about various different factors. I cannot tell you, I actually last year got flown to New York City and interviewed by 60 Minutes. Yeah, it's pretty cool. I'm sitting there, I thought I'm cool. I wore a nice jacket and everything. I didn't wear a tie there because I thought that would be hip in the 60 Minutes studio. And, but they actually took me to a house in Soho where they did the filming. It was a cool place. But they didn't use it because it was primarily because I wouldn't say, yes, the sky's falling and young men are being victimized by the gaming industry. That's pretty, and the guy they ended up putting in there is basically, that's what he said. Young men are being ruined, you know, young white men are being ruined, because that's what we're all about. We're all about worrying about the young white men with disposable income and how they're hurting themselves. But the truth of the matter is, and this is my argument to them, it's not simply about sports betting. It's true that sports betting, and guess what? Young men like sports betting. Why? Because young men oftentimes grow up watching sports. I think I know a lot about what Penny Hardaway should or shouldn't do in the off season. If only Penny would call me, I could tell him who to go after. But the truth of the matter is, we think of our young men and particularly think ourselves as experts. We're drawn to sports, but that's not the only thing that's happened. So as we moved from lottery to casino to sports betting, we've also changed accessibility. We went from needing to travel, get on an airplane, fly somewhere, unless you live in the New Jersey area or whatever's close to Vegas, which is nothing, by the way, nothing's close to Vegas, to a drive. There was a paper published in the early 2000s. It was about college student gambling, and it said that there was a casino within a 100-mile drive of every college campus in America, to the fact now that all you have to do is reach for your phone. And in 5 states, you can sports bet as well as iGame, or get on a legal sports casino, or legal gambling casino online. But we also have acceptability. I don't have this data up there, but in the last 10 years, the acceptability of gambling has risen from about 47% of the population believes it's okay to gamble, to now 59% of the population. And again, with sports has become synonymous with gambling. You can't watch sports programming without there being ads comments, references to betting. Worldwide, what we know, this is a study of all the studies ever done on the prevalence of gambling, and what we know is that 46% of the people in the world, other than there's not good data out of Africa or China in particular, but or like in parts of the world like India, where it's illegal to gamble, there's just not good data. But everywhere that we have good prevalence data, what we know is in those parts of the world, 46% of the people have gambled in the last year. 1 to 2% have a significant problem, which is, this was a study done out of, was this paper that appeared in Lancet, it was a study done out of the UK. So they use English in a weird way. But, and that is that they're basically meeting diagnostic criterion for a gambling disorder. Slot machines, even though the most pervasive form of gambling available across the world is actually sports betting, slot machines end up being the largest contributor. This graph shows this all in a different way. I'm sorry, I'm an academic, so I got to put data up here in graphs. And I'm sorry if they bore you or some of you are math phobic. Please just leave with me. This is a visual story, not math. But what we see is that lottery tickets and raffles are the predominant gambling platform for most people. The sports betting's far down the line. When we talk about the world and whether or not people's engagement is causing problems, what we think about is that a portion of the population don't gamble at all. That's a smaller and smaller portion, but it tends to be somewhere between 12 and 15% of the population have never gambled. The vast majority of the people gamble recreationally. They gamble within means. They don't have experience any harms related to it. The Powerball goes up, they buy a ticket, that sort of thing. They go to the casino and have a dinner and go home. But we do have what might be about, the slide's a little off, in the circle are the problem people, which we refer to as problem gamblers, which means they are periodically experiencing symptoms that are reflective of a gambling disorder, or they seem to reliably fall in a subclinical category. They have some symptoms, but not many. And then we have people who are gambling disordered, and people who we can use the diagnosis of gambling disorder are people who meet that diagnostic criterion in accordance with the DSM-5. Those criterion, there are 9 of them. I'm going to say, it ends up that it looks like it's about 5 to 7% of the population fall into that subclinical category of problem, and 1 to 2% of the population, and that's pretty much worldwide from where we have data, end up looking as though they, or appear to meet diagnostic criterion. There are 9 symptoms. They're up here on the screen, or you can just Google DSM gambling disorder. A person needs to have 4 or more of those symptoms in order to meet that diagnostic criterion. Now, the most, I got rid of that slide. The most common symptom is what's called chasing, which is very unique to gambling, and that is you lose money, either that day or a recent day, and then you go back to gambling in order to win that money back. Now, the truth of the matter, 60% of the population who gamble report that they chase their losses. And I get that, I've done that. I'll put 20 bucks in a slot machine, lose it all, because I never win. And I want to immediately put another 20 back thinking, oh, I'm going to get it back. But that's chasing. And it's the most common symptom. On the severest level are when people go to extreme means in order to secure money. And that includes crimes. We have in our clinical samples now about 2,000 people. A little under 10% of the people have committed a crime. They're mostly what we refer to as white-collar crime, anywhere from taking from their business to skimming the register where they work. But there are people who will, or taking money out of funds from someone else. We've actually had a couple clients who will commit robbery outside of a gambling venue in order to get money to go back in. Almost all of these people don't believe they committed a crime, and they believe that they were going to pay this money back as soon. And I think they're very sincere. I was just borrowing it, you know. That's basically the I'm going to give it back, and that's whether or not they took the money from their family member's purse or they held somebody up in the parking lot. I'm going to tell you that I also think that the criterion for diagnosing somebody with a gambling disorder is quite high. You know, I think alcohol use problems is now very, very low. I think gambling's still a bit high, but it's been fairly reliable and stable. That 1 to 2%. People ask me all the time, has sports betting increased the rate of problem gambling? No, it's just sort of hitting. We're getting a different audience. You know, the prevalence rate goes up a little bit when new forms of gambling occur, and then it dips back down. What we see here is that when you take a look at what seems to be I believe gambling is gambling is gambling. Whether or not you're playing rock, paper, scissors, which is for money, or you're in a 10-leg parlay on the Grizzlies from last night, and I'm sorry for you. But gambling is gambling is gambling. The most common forms of gambling that people appear to have problems are online casinos or slot machines, gambling or casinos, or betting on some racing of some form. And that racing on forms, it's animal racing, but it's also car racing, bicycle racing, et cetera, et cetera. Around the world, there's races on just about everything you can bet on. So they're the most common ones. So sports betting is really popular right now, and it funds us, but the truth of the matter is that gambling is gambling is gambling. There was a paper written about 15 years ago that says, are slot machines the crack cocaine of gambling? And what that paper, a great research team out of Australia, and what they showed is, yeah, it doesn't appear as though it was, even though there were books coming out about how the slot machines are built in order to addict you. Well, I can talk for a while on that. The harms of gambling, and this is kind of important because we can talk through that the harms of gambling happen at both an individual level as well as a societal level. And that's why this falls into a public health sort of question. Yeah, it is the fact that it financially harms an individual. I mean, that's the biggest factor for people who have a gambling problem. But we also know that an individual with a gambling problem will impact, on average, 6 other people. And guess what? They're the people that care about them the most. Their partner, their children, their parents. It's having that impact on those who are closest to them. And guess what? That then impact has more of a societal impact. From an economics point of view, it's money in, money out. It's who has the money, it doesn't really matter. Gambling contributes to society from an economic perspective as a zero net gain. But when we bring that down to a community, a family, an individual, that is considerable. But I also don't want to undershort. I think that focusing on the finances ignores the tremendous individual harm it does to a person. Peer recovery specialists on our team will attest to, who oftentimes have experiences in both mental health and substance abuse. We'll talk about the fact, yeah, gamblers are different, but yeah, they've got a lot of stuff going on. There are a lot of bad things going on in their life, and it's not uncommon for people to have pre-existing things like a trauma, significant trauma in their history, or that the gambling, in fact, has caused problems. So, for example, borrowing money or stealing money that leads to interesting people showing up at your doorstep, or being thrown out of your house and now living in your car. I mean, it has a tremendous impact, and about 1/3 of the individuals who we see with a gambling problem have reported either current or recent suicidal ideation. Some of that's impulsivity, you know, you get that. but it's also because people are trying to find relief from the amount of pain that they're experiencing due to their gambling. This is an interesting graph, and I left it in here because I love talking about it, even though I hated this study. This is a paper that just really recently appeared in, where did it was in JAMA, yeah, in JAMA Internal Medicine, and it was done by a bunch of computer scientists, but it really showed that as sports betting has become more available across the US, so has the searches for people looking for help with gambling addiction. And now, there's a variety of problems here, but there are good and bad news from these data, I think. I think the good news is that people are, as we increase accessibility, people are looking for help. I think people are understanding it is an addiction and they can pursue help. Getting help's a different story, but that's the case. When we turn to clinical issues, this is where I said, most common diagnostic criteria is chasing. If you look at those people who are subclinical, what you find is a real preoccupation with gambling. You find them saying, yeah, I'm not gambling. The issues of withdrawal, that they become irritable, that they don't like the idea of quitting. I mean, gamblers people who have a gambling problem, even at a subclinical level, will report, gambling's like the best part of their life. It's fun. It's what they do. People go to the casino because there's a community. Even if they never talk to other people, there's a community there. But what also creeps in is lying to others about your gambling. That's another real key sort of subclinical where you hide your gambling. So when someone's saying to you, yeah, I don't tell my partner, my wife, husband, whatever, about my gambling, they're hiding it, they're masquerading it, and that's a problematic, for those who in substance abuse world already know that, but that's really becoming problematic. And then, of course, as I already mentioned, doing things, desperate things in order to get money is at the most severe level. So when someone committed a crime to gamble, yeah, you don't need to ask them any other question. They're going to say yes to the other 8. Comorbidity. These are all numbers that come from meta-analysis. Meta-analysis are studies of studies. Okay, so they take all the studies that have asked the question and they come up with an average. The numbers end up being a little weird, but I think the story's pretty reliable. The first one is, yeah, people with gambling problems probably have had or currently have other addictive involvement. The most likely one, even till today, quite honestly, is nicotine. Over and over again, studies show that about 60% of people who gamble and have a gambling problem are ingesting nicotine in some way. And now it's patches and vapes, but it used to be cigarettes. I think this is because the stimulus, it's stimulating. I think that people, when they gamble, the nicotine helps them maintain the buzz as they're doing this. But we also find approximately 30% alcohol use disorder, about half that with other substance use. Now, I want to point this out, not because I will argue until the day ends against an addictive personality. My peers, Keith's laughing because I'll slap him upside the head if he mentions to me addictive personality. That is a horrible way of thinking about people, and there is no evidence for it. Is there a symptom substitution? No, not really. Although if you look at it from a 10,000-foot level, it looks like it might be. But most of us are looking for this as an element of personality. But there are no personality traits that separate those with an addiction or a gambling problem from those who don't. Do they tend to be People who may have dabbled in a variety of substances, yeah. And you know why? They're okay with risk-taking. They tend to be impulsive. They're okay with risks, or they evaluate risks inaccurately. So I want you to think more about what is the behavior and what are the precipitants of engaging in something to have a problem. The other element that's common when we think of addictive personalities is this is the key reason why I hate the idea, is what you have in front of you is a person who has done a variety of things because of the frickin' pain in their life. They're pained. And they're trying to relieve that pain. And gambling can be fun, you know? Betting on a game you don't care about makes you care about that game. Go to a casino sometime. It's weird, I loiter in casinos. A lot of gambling conferences, like gambling researchers, we're in casinos. We're in Vegas. And I sort of loiter around hoping somebody will offer me a free drink. But watch people when they win. It is so exciting when they win. It is so much fun when they win. It's so much fun even when you come close to winning. And it relieves all the horrible things. And here's one of the key elements about gambling, and I could talk another whole hour about how gambling is and is not different than other addictions, but I'm going to give you the key one. No one goes out on a drinking binge believing they're going to wake up and all of their problems are going to be solved. They don't. You drink because you want to forget all your problems, you want to get away from your problems, and you want to have fun by getting wasted. It's weird, but it is. People who gamble with the belief that I am one win away from fixing all my problems. It probably wouldn't fix all your problems, but boy, it sure feels like it should. Who in this room has not thought about, if I just won that Powerball, what would I do with that money? Yeah, I do. I think the first thing I would do is pay all my peer recovery specialists $1 million a year. I guess I got to buy a ticket now, don't I? But what's that? Put it in a trust fund. But the reality is that, yeah, we all think, what would happen? What would we do? Would we move? Would we live here? Would I live on the coast? Oh no, it's going to flood. What do I do? Should I go skiing? I've never skied before, but I'm going to go. We dream about what to do. My favorite, I said this, I used to start talks with saying to people, what would you do if you won $1 million or $5 million? And the very best answer I ever got was a woman there who sheepishly raised her hand, and she said, I would buy more shoes than I would ever wear. I want to shout out her honesty and how warped her dreams are, but her honesty. Anxiety disorder, so mood disorder is common. And whether or not mood disorder is primary or secondary to a gambling problem, try to figure that out. I never will. We can find some incidences where people, but it's a very reciprocal process. And I said 30-some% of our clients actually screen positive for some suicidal ideation, recent or current, and for which we work with, we're working now with Dr. Rudd, David Rudd, who is, if you have never heard him talk about prevention of suicide, he used to be the U of M president, and he's got great research on intervening around suicidal ideation. And so we're partnering with him to work with our clients, but it's really common because people, when one of the things is that they don't think they worry they're never gonna win the money back that they lost. And then finally, an anxiety disorder. And we have people who anxiety actually is relieved by gambling, and people whose anxiety is caused by their gambling. If you want to screen for a gambling disorder in any of your practices, this question, the brief, I always did a little brief biosocial gambling screen. It was developed by some friends of mine who were at Harvard, which is why it's got a complicated title. It's also the most complicated 3 questions I ever saw, but it works pretty well. They're Harvard. They had to add more words because they're Harvard. I get it. But if a person answers yes to any of these 3 questions, it's worth going further and doing a diagnostic interview. You know, finding out what else might be going on. So, you know, if anybody here, you screen people, it's easy to do, 3 questions, it flags very, very well. If you want a copy of this, it's on our website. I brought some brochures if anybody wants it, but our website's thegamblingclinic.com, and you'll see that one of the options on thegamblingclinic.com, no spaces, thegamblingclinic.com, there's a thing for providers, and we try to put information on there that providers might find helpful. The screening tool's there, so you can download it right from there and use that if you want. There's also a measure called the Problem Gambling Severity Index, which I have to look at that because we just call it the PGSI. PGSI is a pretty cool measure because it really measures some symptoms, but mostly about harms. And this is also available at thegamblingclinic.com. If somebody scores 8 and above on that scale, the likelihood of them meeting diagnostic criteria is very, very high. So I think, short of needing to do a diagnostic interview, if you give this measure, if somebody screens positive on the brief biosocial screen, give them this, and if, you know, that'll tell you whether or not you need to pay attention to the gambling. There's a new measure that just a second study came out this week on this new measure that I like a lot, but I'm going to wait until there's a few more studies before we adopt that. And it really measures very specifically the areas of harm that someone's experienced, and it's not that long of a measure. When we talk about treatment, okay, so again, I apologize for the data-driven nature of this. These are all, so a meta-analysis, as I mentioned before, is a studies. So these are the results of meta-analysis, and we've done several of these. These are our products. But a meta-analysis, when it produces what's called an effect size in particular here called Hedges G. You don't need to know all the details of that. That's psychobabble or statistics babble. But the idea is that when the effect size is around 0.2, it's like a nudge. It's a movement in a good direction. Whether it's sustainable or not, I don't know. When an effect size hits around 0.4, 0.5, that's pretty good. That ain't bad. When effect size gets up around 0.7, 0.8 or better, then you're saying, oh, that's a large effect size, it's a sustainable change. Psychotherapy in general has an effect size that, depending on the meta-analysis you look at and the presenting problem, is somewhere between 0.6 to 0.9. So as it relates to gambling, here's what we know. Non-opioid antagonists, 0 effect. The likelihood of benefiting from so SSRIs, antidepressants in general, you give that to somebody with a gambling problem, you could give it to them or you can give them a placebo, the effect will be exactly the same. Some people will get better, you know, some people will get better. You know, it's, I'm gonna go too deep into the statistics babble of it, but the truth of the matter is it's a waste of time. An opioid antagonist, so really trying to get at urges, that has a modest effect right in the 0.2 range, according to the literature there. Not much, it's a little bit of nudge, and guess what? Withdraw the medication and the urges return. Self-help, brief intervention, self-guided treatment and self-help, they're a little bit better. Online interventions, well, that's showing a little bit more promise. So the problem with online interventions is nobody finishes them. They start them, they don't finish them. I was on a dissertation in Canada 2 years ago, and a dissertation that was done in Australia about 1.5 years ago about an online intervention, and the poor student just had a horrible time getting anyone to get through the protocol. They'll go through one module of like 7 modules, and and they bail. They don't do it. But if people do, the people who do it realize a pretty nice effect. By contrast, face-to-face treatment is very effective. It's about the same as general psychotherapy or better, and particularly if you utilize cognitive behavioral techniques in a motivational manner, then that effect is even higher. And I think that's what's critical in that motivational element is really what's critical about this. People call when they're in great pain. Put a little ice on it a little while later and they're not as much pain and they're not sure they want to change anymore. So the ability to keep people engaged in a change process, I think, is critical. When we actually ask what are those changes that happen, what we find is the effect size for symptoms, gambling symptoms, is over 1%, effect size of Hedges G over 1, which means it really has an effect. And it's true. People get through our treatment, they'll generally move from having, on average, about 7 of those 9 symptoms. At the end of treatment, the average is about 1. So people will respond. Now, we have a very refined treatment. And the key to our treatment, and the treatments that are mostly I'm talking about here, is they're designed to work with gambling. Gambling has many similarities to substance use disorders, but it is different, as I mentioned a little bit ago. But we also find a very significant effect sizes related to gambling frequency, as well as gambling intensity. Those numbers are a little lower than the symptoms. It has to do with measurement error, but they're really kind of robust findings. But in addition to that, if I did this right, what we also find, and this is across all studies that have done this, where people measure diagnostically do people meet a mood disorder, we find depression improves, anxiety improves, and overall quality of life improves. So we find that treating the gambling problem has a positive effect on the person's life. How well this is sustained across time, we're not as confident about, but we know that within a treatment protocol, and we've done some research about the dosage of treatment and what needs to go in. It looks like about 6 to 8 sessions, cognitive behavioral intervention with a motivational element to it will yield these sort of changes. But here's the problem. Of people who have a gambling problem, only 20% try to do something about it. And when I say try to do something about it, that value of 20% includes the call a helpline. When we actually look at how many people pursue a treatment that might work, that number drops to about 10%. So out of everyone who has a gambling problem, 20% will call out for help, but only 10% will engage in treatment. I should also point out, because I don't think I have a slide on it, one of the other problems across the literature in general is getting people to stay in treatment. As you guys know, in treating substance abuse, et cetera, there is a real issue around keeping people in treatment. I think we're making great milestones in how to do that. We're about to start this summer a clinical trial on using contingency management to keep people in treatment. So more on that later. But what we know is people are very reluctant to get there. And what contributes to that reluctance is a variety of factors, stigma being a huge one. As you guys probably know, mental health problems, behavioral health problems are more stigmatized than physical health problems. Among mental health problems, addictions are the more stigmatized. And among the addictions, gambling and heroin are the most stigmatized. Predominantly, it's that people think that someone who has gambling problems is failing morally or failing because they're just deciding not to be successful, but they also find them dangerous. They believe that those with a gambling problem will hurt them. The other issues is, secondly, people don't seem to be aware of the harms. And I think this is a public health messaging thing. We are just not aware. So yeah, I lost a little money last night. That's not a big deal. Yeah, I can't pay my rent this month, but that's okay. I can borrow it from my buddy. You know? Yeah, I mean, I made X number of dollars this year, but I didn't gamble all of it. You know, the people believe, and people believe. We had a guy come into treatment one time, and he made six-figure income, and he kept a very detailed sheet, an Excel spreadsheet of his gambling. And he had rules about how much he was going to gamble, et cetera, and there were a lot of days he won. But at the end of the year, he lost about $40,000. That awareness of a problem is huge about getting people into treatment. The other thing is people don't know where to go for services. So I have another whole talk I can give you about people not being aware, and I think we own that as providers. We need to be able to provide people venues. I am tired of seeing Psychology Today profiles of providers that talk about mindfulness and blah, 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 blah. That's not what people are looking for. People are looking saying, I'm depressed, I need help. You're gonna say, I help people who are depressed. You know, I help people who have a gambling problem. You know, you gotta specifically call out who needs help, and you gotta let people know when you're competent, when you can be able to help them. The other thing is a real value in helping this retention issue is to help people know I think we believe as providers oftentimes that you're gonna come in and we're gonna get you going, you know? But the truth of the matter is, like what's on the left-hand side here, the journey to getting control of your behavior has lots of ups and downs. And it's really working. This is where the motivational part as a provider comes in. And that is really helping people find a long vision to this so that they see those ups and downs as moments to learn and progress as opposed to fail. I'm looking to see how much time I have because I got more slides. Prevention. What's that?
You're already over.
No, it's not according to, am I? Where's Alex?
2:30.
What's that? Oh, but we started late. All right, I'll shut up real quick. Prevention for gambling. Guess what? Who here has an app on the? You know, you have to say how many people have a sports wagering app? If you open up a sports wagering app, they'll tell you right away. You can set a limit. You can do this. You can do that. But they don't tell you how to do it or how much limits you could set, et cetera, et cetera. This world of marketing that you can control your gambling and not have a problem is horrific. We just wrote a paper that reviewed 108 publications on gambling advertising. Here's the two fundamental findings from those 108 papers. One is advertising works. And a corollary to that is more advertising works better, which is why you see all these ads. The second thing is none of those ads tell you how not to hurt yourself. Almost all of them. There's a few now with the NCAA and the NFL, but they're just not very good ads in getting that done. I'm going to jump. So thanks for listening. Thanks for listening. Everything I talk about here, what I'm representing are people like these people here. Okay, I am very, very fortunate to have a team of really smart folks to work with. Most of them are young adults. No, I'm not talking about Keith. Young adults who work with us all the time. This is part of our optimizing our treatment protocol. This is how we advance the science of it. And as you as providers, particularly because you're local in the area, refer people to us. Let us know who needs help. We'll work with providers. Our goal is to make affordable, accessible, evidence-based care for anyone who has a gambling problem. So send them our way. If you have questions related to it, you can look on the website for the provider information, or just give us a call. Send us an email. and we'll help you any way we can. So thanks for letting me go over, and for Keith for harassing me for going over. I appreciate your time and attention, and just let me know.